Hi, thank you. I'm really glad to be here. My name's Jen Warner. Welcome to our fireside chat. It did get cold rather quickly and abruptly in this area of the country, so I'm pretending there's a nice fire here and we're all gathered around it and we're feeling comfortable and warm and cozy. Thank you, Laurent. That was a pretty informative presentation for me personally. I am the newest member of Team Current here in Chicago. I'm the technical program director after spending a couple of decades in the municipal water and wastewater research planning space with the Water Research Foundation, formerly known as the AWWA Research Foundation. So when Angela mentioned earlier in her introductory comments about being a little bit uncertain about why water and manufacturing were being considered together in this space, it made all the sense in the world to me for a couple of reasons. One, industry, EPA stat, as Angela's slide referenced, shows industry uses 12% of the American water used. I'm suspecting that is from a quantity perspective only. That is just water supply and the volume of water that is needed by the American industrial sector to produce what it produces. So from a drinking water perspective, those water providers on the drinking water plant, they are intending to provide the water of a certain purity that whatever that industry may need, right? So they're interested in knowing what kind of quality is needed by that manufacturer in addition to the quantity. And that means there are different processes that go into that drinking water treatment. There are chemicals that are managed by SCADA software that can get hacked into. And so that's important. On the wastewater side, industries often have waste streams that need to be pre-treated before they can move into the wastewater plant. Wastewater plants have very sophisticated and sensitive microbial communities. Some of that industrial wastewater is too tough for a wastewater treatment plant, can kill the bugs, and then you don't have effective wastewater treatment. All of those systems rely on information and technology. So I think water and manufacturers talking about this from that perspective alone is important. And I think cross-sector knowledge sharing, a key aspect like this that is shared, is just so powerful. So I'm thrilled that water was included in manufacturing. I'm learning so much. Before we get too far down into the session today, I will just talk about the format. We are going to be briefly introducing our two speakers. We have Mike and Mike from two leading areas in Illinois. I'll provide brief introductions for them, and then they'll each provide a 5-minute overview of what they're doing in their agencies, and we'll tee up a conversation for about 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up to your questions, and we'll have a conversation with you. So first, I want to introduce Michael Peggies. He's on the far, what would that be, your far right, my far left. Mike is Chief Information Officer at the City of Aurora. Mike has been with Aurora for about 5 years and manages the citywide IT strategic plan for technology services that serve all departments and hundreds of thousands of direct constituent interactions. Mike is a relative newcomer to government. He's been with the city, as I said, for about 5 years. I believe before that it was more in maybe the investment community, a little bit more on the business side of things. And despite only being in this job for a handful of years, he's developed quite a passion for city work and municipal work, and is looking forward to sharing his thoughts here today. Mike Schrader is Bulk Electric Systems Cyber Support Supervisor at Springfield City Water, Light, and Power. Mike's got many decades under his belt, despite the youthful look on his face. He began with 7 years in the Army Signal Corps with assignments in Germany and Korea. He then worked for GTEC Corporation for 10 years in networking and installation of lottery systems throughout Europe. And then for the past 22 years, he's worked in IT network administration, which has evolved into his current cybersecurity role at Springfield CWLP. So please allow them to each provide about 5-minute overview, and then we'll get into a round of discussion.
You got decades.
Okay. So basically, I guess the importance of coming and networking today with everyone here in this event. I'm more on the electric side, but our water side is, also critical infrastructure that we're kind of working together. So I think one of the challenges is, like, we kind of used that word earlier, we were talking about silos, where everybody's kind of doing their own thing. Our OT side is doing different than our IT side, and our water's not regulated doing, maybe the NERC standards that was presented in the Siemens, overview. That's kind of where they want to get to, but, it's just that development first of looking at, okay, well, you got to assess what are your risks, and then you got to look at, okay, setting up maybe an incident response plan, but you got to know what those risks are before you can get that incident response plan going. So those are the things that are the challenges, is kind of coordinating that, and networking with other organizations. And I think my own personal experience, we're at a critical juncture in our history and the country. Look at what's going on with Russia, and Ukraine, and the possibility, that I'll go back to my military days if you give me a little bit. But when I was in Germany, you're serving your allies over there. We're serving our allies in Korea, and standing there at the time back in history when I was there, when the wall was up in New Berlin, you're looking your enemy in the eye, and it kind of a hard realization of what the challenges are and what you're really fighting. So I feel like I'm still in the trenches. I've stood on the wall, or in the DMZ in Korea also, and looked at the communism over there and say, anybody coming across trying to get to the democracy is going to get shot, So I kind of bring that into I still feel I'm in the trenches with cyber warfare that's going on now, and ransomware is kind of another, bad actors, but it's the bigger risk to me is the nation states. If they can coordinate an attack on our critical infrastructure, they can disrupt our country. So that's where we're at, and I think, that's really my passion, I guess, for cybersecurity, is to, not get to that point where they don't have to step on your soil anymore to attack you. They can take and disrupt your country, your banking, your critical infrastructure. You don't have power, your water's not going to be pumping. So electric side is just as important, on the water side too. So I will kind of leave it to Michael, because he's done some things we heard earlier that we're trying challenges that are with the city, to get to that point of removing those silos too, and working all together for that overall, cyber being secure for your citizens. So I'll throw it over to Mike.
So good morning, everybody. Mike Piggy, CIO for the city of Aurora, second largest city in the state, but second to none. No offense to Springfield, okay? All right. And I also want to say that I'm Aurora native, and I'm also a veteran. But what I'd like to do is thank everybody in the room, but also let's thank the military here from the Illinois National Guard, and thank them for their service. So being a ex-military also and working for DOD, I just feel that's my duty. Been at the city since June of 2017. I worked in investment banking for about 5 years. Worked overseas for like 19 years in different sectors, IT, telecom, also with the Department of Defense, with Southern European Task Force there in Vicenza. After my career overseas, I came back to Aurora and was asked by Mayor Irving to come to the city of Aurora, be the CIO. It was in around April of 2017. So I took that job because that's where I grew up. And like I was telling some other people here, that it was personal. So one of the things that the city of Aurora, so in terms of responsibility, we did reorganize from the beginning. It was one of my requirements, actually taking the job, to smash those silos. I said, I'm not coming in with the siloed IT. I need to reorganize and centralize across the board, right? So all these shadow ITs in the police department and public safety, which is quite typical in any municipality, right? They always have their own IT. That came under the office of the CIO. We had people in fire. Those came out, right? We had GIS analysts in water and sewer. We took those out, and we centralized IT. It was in 2018, Q1 or Q2. So now the office CIO consists of about 40 ITs, about 40 plus in the organization. We have a cyber and technology risk group. We have a project management office. We have a service desk. We have data and analytics. We have GIS. And we have, I'm missing something there. It's going to kill me. Oh, infrastructure and operations. Oh my God, I forgot him. He's sitting right there looking at me, right? He was like, you better not forget me, right? And under that organization, there's network services, there's the CAD, systems for public safeties, records management, telecom infrastructure, systems, ERP, all the applications and support. So we like to say we're one IT, is kind of our motto. But more importantly, it's not just the people that are centralized, it's also the budget and the spending. It's all based on policies that's been put in place. So any IT procurement request from hardware, software, professional services, any related investment has to come through the IT PMO, and we review that at the IT level. We take it up to the mayor's office with the department heads, and we will review that as part of our portfolio, our book of work, which is managed out of the IT PMO office. Now, you can imagine that first year, I had a lot of the department heads that was looking at me sideways. They hated me. I think a lot of them still hate me to this day, but I think they understand the impact and the benefit of that. So that's just kind of a snapshot at a 50,000-foot view. But what I will say, piggybacking off what Mike mentioned, I actually had an opportunity about 2 years ago to be invited to, it was Johns Hopkins University, myself and Leela Karamori, my director for cyber technology risk, to go to their applied physics laboratory where they do a lot of research for the government and also DARPA. And I was reading one of the technical manuals, and it said in there that cybersecurity is the #1 threat to Homeland Security operations as of today, and that was 2 years ago, right? And there's probably that before that, right? But I totally concur, you know, coming from a different environment and looking at that when I came into the city of Aurora, when the mayor said, you know, we're going to focus on technology, you know, I want you to put something together where we're the smartest city in Aurora. So that was really vague, right? But, you know, we created that technology strategic plan. But then he said, also, I don't want to end up in the news for some cyber attack, right? So we started looking at the cyber, doing an assessments, and we were looking at just, there was a focus on the IT side, right? And we talked a lot about IT and OT. And the gentleman from Siemens, Lauren, he articulated that very well. But I think from a executive level view, what I would say the difference between IT and OT is IT is focused on confidentiality, integrity, and availability, that old CIA triad. The OT is basically focused on safety, right? How do we ensure that the city of Aurora, with our water utility, can provide a reliable supply of safe, clean drinking water, right? And the city of Aurora, I mean, they pride themselves on those 8 or 9 awards that they've had since 1998 in terms of the cleanest drinking water, you know, in the state from the American Water Works Association, right? And, you know, that's all regulated by the EPA, right? So, you know, we make sure that we have, you know, the controls, the processes, the mechanism in place, but more importantly, we're talking about the policies, the people, the partners. We talk about supply chain resiliency and things like that, and also the products, which is the technology. So we do have a pretty robust, you know, cybersecurity plan in place. I'm gonna knock on wood somewhere around here, you know, but we do our best to say that we've done everything humanly possible based on the budget, the resources that we've been given at the City of Aurora to mitigate, and I'm going to say mitigate that potential risk on our IT and OT infrastructure, which there is a convergence now as we move into that 4th and 5th industrial revolution, which just makes things a lot more complicated. So.
Thank you. So I think what we just heard from Laurent is we need to move away from convergence and think about collaboration. We need to be bridging IT and OT together. So you both told us a little bit about your journeys, both similar in some ways with, you know, strong military background and being veterans, and a little bit about what keeps you up at night. But I'd like to dig in a little bit to that. I'd like to for you to each give us a couple of minutes on, what is something that keeps you up at night with your role? And what would a solution look like to you, to that one thing? And maybe that's not something a cybersecurity, leader can admit, but to the extent that you're capable of admitting something that keeps you up at night, I'd like to know what that is.
Oh, I got a whole bunch of stuff that keeps me up.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with Michael. There's a lot of stuff that keeps me up at night, but I just think it's the unknown that, you don't know the visibility into your systems, like what could be going on, because I think, was it Lauren that did, they're in your systems for a long time and before you realize they're there. So having that visibility is, those 0-day threats you don't even know about, or they're hiding behind a protocol on your OT side that looks like normal traffic because you don't know that that's a normal, is a scary thought, So again, I think working together, to do assessments, and I think that's what's coming together the last few years I've seen from the government level down is like, sharing information, mandatory reporting maybe coming up, on the water side, that are they going to align with what the power industries, America's doing with their compliance processes and controls and auditing to make sure that you're meeting those, that comes into play. So those things I see coming, and I'm glad that we're talking about it. I think one of the bigger problems too is supply chain. The aging equipment that you have to replace, that on the OT side, it could be years, 10, 20 years that's been sitting there in an XP machine. It's segmented off, you think it's safe, but you have to replace that, and then you find out that, hey, you might need a firewall, but it's going to take a year to get it, So as a country, I think we have to look at that and say, how can we help that? How can we manufacture the chips and manufacturing here in our own country instead of Taiwan that may be taken over by China? So anyway, I'm going to throw all that out there, but it's just, there's a lot of challenges I think coming up to get to a more secure systems across the board for all critical infrastructure. And that's kind of where we're at. We have to assess that and then move forward to address those things. So.
Hey, Mike, is your green light on?
Oh, sorry.
No.
Sorry, there it is.
Perfect.
Okay, I must have hit it.
Like I said, I think there's a lot of things, but when we talk about cyber, I would say, I'll do a process of elimination here. I don't think it's so much the IT side. The IT side, we can shut it down, we can rebuild it, we can bring it back up, right? It is the OT side, right? And I think it's from two aspects. I think the one aspect that sticks in my head or keeps me up at night is it is definitely the people. And it's the people inside, the employees, right? They're, at least, I forgot what the exact statistic is. I think it's like 85% of all attacks are insider threats, right? It's whether it's mistake, it's human error, or just some malicious activity. And it's like, how do you mitigate those type of situations or those type of attacks? And again, it goes back to response time, right? How do you react? How do you identify it? How do you detect? How do you respond? How do you protect? So forth, and how do you recover? And it's that the quicker the quicker you can mitigate that risk, right? We talked about someone talked about the incident down in Florida, right, with the chemical levels and things of that nature. And again, even though it was just someone who was basically doing a remote control into the system, again, if you would have done the assessment and you would have identified that, maybe you shouldn't have remote control on your systems that controlling, such critical, or say mission essential functions, you could have mitigated that, right? So, it's really the people. I mean, I think that's the biggest aspect that really keeps me up, is that whole human error factor. Because it's just a matter of time. Because it's not if it's going to happen, it's just when, right? And it's like, how do you minimize that impact to the organization, right? Whether it's related to safety, whether it's ways to cost, because we know what happened on the IT side in Atlanta, right? And as a matter of fact, I was just talking with the ex-CIO there, and the recovery cost. I remember they had talked about it was somewhere upwards of $35 million, but they said that's not even accurate anymore. It's still rising. It's up over $55 million that they're paying just to recover from that particular incident. And that's on the IT side. Now think about if that happens on the OT side, right? You have these systems on, like we have the SCADA network, and we talk about IoT and things, but we have to also remember IoT is not a new concept. I mean, SCADA systems have been around since the early 60s, right? I mean, those are the original IoT systems, right? They're controlling PLCs, processor controllers, and machinery. And, a lot of that equipment is like, how do you modernize that? You don't modernize that. It's like a rip and replace, right? So you have to build these perimeters, and you have to put those policies, you have to put those processes, you have to put that technology in place to try to manage these systems and to make them reliable. But at the same time, how do you focus on the worst case scenario, and how do you recover if there's some type of attack? So I guess, the short answer is it's basically, OT and people, right?
Thank you. I think that is definitely a resonating theme, and it's so important when we're talking about workforce. It's so important when we're talking about, the current workforce that exists in your spaces. You've got many generations represented in your organizations. I was at a talk recently, and maybe this is a common statistic, but it was new to me. It was a workforce manager, consultant, who said there are 5 generations working in today's workplace for the first time in American history. 5 generations, from the traditionalist pre-boomers through, the kids that are, were born in 2000. It's stunning. And he was talking about how each of these generations have a way of communicating and going about their work. And he was making the point that, guess what? Every single person on your team, every single person in your workforce has a certain way of doing their work, and they're all right. They're all correct and right for doing the work they do the way they do it. And it's up to you to build the systems and develop the culture and the processes that can bridge some of these generations together and not alienate or try to enforce certain things without a lot of explanation and detail. And so, Mike Peggy's, I was kind of chuckling here when you were talking about being hired, and your first goal or objective was to break silos. And I can imagine that was not easy, and I can imagine the culture is still shifting, and maybe this is a question for both of your organizations, but when you're thinking about workforce as it relates to securing your agency's assets, why is it, in your opinion, so important to invest in your workforce at the same time you are making investments into technology and cybersecurity and then developing these processes?
Well, I guess I'll go first with, having that multi-generational is really, you got people retiring. I'm probably near the end myself in a few years. But, that knowledge transfer to the younger generation is very important. And, we are challenged at the city with trying to recruit people, that, want to work at the city, and have that training and skill set. There's that giant gap in, 600 to 800,000 cybersecurity jobs. So that's along with, the infrastructure upgrades we need that knowledge upgrade too. That's why I said we're kind of at a critical point, I think, in our history, of making this a priority across the nation and sharing that information and pain points. That's what it's important to have these conversations, So I think, like I said, that to me, the workforce, if you don't have that, then what are you going to do? You're going to outsource everything, and that costs you millions. And, kind of like going to the cloud, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to offload that to another company, but where's the demark of responsibility for cybersecurity? Are they really representing your best interest for your city, your company? So that's kind of where I see things, with the workforce is very important. If you don't have the trained people, you don't have a team that can really respond properly to events. So, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, the whole workforce question, I mean, that's probably a whole complete another session, the future of the workforce, right? I would say in terms of, the challenges are the same. I can talk about how we manage some of those, especially in the cyberspace, where there's obviously a skills gap and there's a pay gap in the public sector versus the private sector. And trying to bring in the right talent to manage these spaces or these functions and these activities is difficult. And what we did as part of our strategic planning back in 2018 was we looked at those organizations and the resources to say that these are difficult filled positions, right? We need to do a study, and we went out to some of the consulting companies like Korn Ferry, and they looked at the pay in the public sector for those particular positions. And with those results, they put in place what was a market premium for certain IT jobs and also engineering jobs that were in public works. So that helped some, but it didn't solve the problem. Then what we had to look at, we were trying to build up, these different teams like data and analytics and cyber, and we knew that if we were going to build out the cyber organization, with the capabilities that we need to manage our infrastructure, IT and OT, that it would have cost us $8 million a year. That's just in staffing. That's not even with the products, the services, the overhead, and you're not even talking about like, the functions, the professional services, so forth and so on. So what we did was we looked at another model, which was more of a managed security service provider, right? But going back to the point you talked about in terms of accountability and responsibility. So we built a accountability layer, which we put in the director of cyber and technology risk, and we put in our CISO, right? Those are the only two full-time positions in cyber that we have in the city of Aurora that are city employees. So they manage the strategy, they oversee the technical operations, they design, right, and they sign off, and they we brought in a managed security service provider who basically runs our operations. They run our SOC, right? They also provide other services around penetration testing, threat intelligence. What else am I missing there, guys? Vulnerability management, security device management, and no, you manage the policies. And, so we have those technical operations through this managed security provider, and we did a contract. And that contract holds liability on them, but ultimately the liability falls on the city of Aurora if something actually happens, right? So that contract allowed us to bring in, this capability at about a third of the cost, right? Yearly, right? So now we have a capability that if we would have stayed with the normal model that was in the public sector, we probably still have 2 or 3 people, and that's it, right? But now we have an entire cyber team. We also have technology risk, and I want to be really specific. It's cyber, but it's technology risk. And from my perspective, the technology risk is more governance, risk, and compliance, and it focuses on the process, the policies, the processes, the people, and the partners. And it also focuses on education, right? The keeping the employees, right, educated in terms of what is that risk if you click on that, right? We're constantly running, phishing campaigns, right? And it's been put out by the mayor's office, if you click on something you're not supposed to click on, you have to take that compliance test, right? And then you have to pass that test, and then you go on, right? And that's ongoing, right? So that education is ongoing. Now, The staff, they hate it. They complain about it all the time, but they'll be okay, right? So it's for their benefit. Sometimes they don't know what's right for them, right? So, but again, that's enforced. All these policies and processes are enforced by the leadership, right? The mayor and the chief of staff have to take an active role to say, this is what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to enforce it, right? And you have to be in compliance, right? And then we report on that, right? We report on that to the mayor's office every month in terms of those, and we give regular updates. So I even forgot what the question was. I was around, what was the question?
It was a word salad type of a question. It was multi-pronged, but it was about the
about people.
multi-generation
Right.
workforce and the challenges with culture development. I think you answered a question that has been in the back of my mind about, as an employee who's not involved in a lot of, what goes on under the hood, developing these processes, getting super annoyed at having to change my password all the time, getting super annoyed that I have to, re-log into my system 6 times a day and do the MFA and all that sort of thing. So it's just, but, you recognize it's for your own good, right?
Right.
You get real with it.
Right. And just let me add one thing. I think it's kind of funny, but it's kind of true. So myself and Cliff Moore, who's right here, he's actually my CISO. So we had this meeting, and I'm going to poke him for this forever, right? He said in a meeting, he said, cyber is a dictatorship. I kind of looked at him. I'm thinking to myself, you're right, but you can't say that in front of the staff. Right? Because again, it's about forcing behavior, right? You gotta force people to do things because they're not gonna do it on their own, right? Because we are just inherently comfortable. We tend to lean to our old ways, and you gotta force them, and it has to be repetitious. It has to be like, nope, you can't do that. You gotta do like this, don't push that button. Oh, if you push that button, here's the consequences, right? So that forced behavior is something that you have to do, but you gotta sell it in a way that it makes it seem like it's palatable for them and they can digest that, right? So we always joke about that, but he's right. You just can't tell the staff that, right? So
Well, I'm seeing a D-suite showing up in new corporate culture, right? The dictator suite level. So you've got the C-suite, and we're moving it up a notch to the D-suite, but that's in parentheses. You can't say that out loud. So one more question, then I'd like to open it up to the audience. You mentioned a little bit, Mike, Peggy's, about the resources that you think are necessary to help, bring municipalities in. You did a model, and I'm sure you may have done this as well, Mike, with Aurora. In Springfield, with respect to, $8 million a year all in to staff it for yourself, or combining some full-time staff with outsourcing managed services. What do you think would bring every municipality or organization up to speed to be truly protective of critical infrastructure in their agencies?
a cyber attack.
Oh, you need a driving force.
That's when it comes out, but by that time it's too late.
Right. So that's the only resource you need. You need someone to hit you.
Well, it's a strategy. It's a scare tactic. Well, it worked in the city of Aurora, right? Because even when I was there, I just said, oh, look what happened in Boston. Oh, look what happened in San Diego. Look what happened in New York. Look happened in Baltimore. The city council, do you want that to happen to us? And I pounded that into their head. Then they said, you know what? We should probably look at cyber, right? We should invest in that.
I see.
So
for
it worked for us. I don't know. I mean, Springfield's a little bit more political, so I don't know how it works over there.
I think, you just look at Quincy just got hacked this year,
Yeah.
so you go to your mayor and say, hey, in the headlines, with everything going on with critical infrastructure and, in the world with Ukraine and Russia, and, it's in the headlines, and I think now it's in not the back of the mayor's mind, but maybe in the front of the mayor's mind. So it's an opportune time to really, restructure and get to the point where you really are being efficient. Even like you said, if it's a combination of, managed services on your local people. But I think the challenge really for small municipalities is really they can't staff it. Exactly. And they don't have the expertise. So I think that's where, to me, it's key that we have, guidance maybe, and with these grants coming down. It can come down through, provided services that are paid for by these grants for those smaller, municipalities. I think it's a key thing that's not really available yet for them.
That's a great point. So how easy is it for smaller municipalities to go after those grants? Like, where do those live and how do they find them?
Well, I know with right now it's the state and local, whatever tribunal grant process is really, it's my understanding so far, it's a 4-year program and it's controlled, by our CISO Adam Ford is kind of the one putting the cyber plan together for the whole state. So that money has yet to really be, granted to the state. And then how is it getting down to municipalities remains to be seen. But there's the Department of Energy has their own rural grant program that's, I've been through a couple listening sessions and it's, yet to be seen how you can apply for that one and what's the requirements, so, we're starting to see money, dedicated to that because of, the risks that are to our critical infrastructure across the country. So it will be interesting to see how it plays out, but I really think that's the savior for the smaller municipalities and stuff that can't afford staffing on their own.
Right. I actually totally agree with Mike. I mean, that's actually one avenue, but another avenue that we looked at is I think it's incumbent upon the larger cities and the state of Illinois to also provide support as well. So one of the things, so Aurora's very unique in the sense that we actually sit in 4 counties. So we sit in Kendall, DuPage, Will, and Kane. And what we're looking at doing and what we've already done in certain aspect is kind of this shared services model, right? We do it with our public safety. For example, our dispatch in 911, we support Naperville, and we also support North Aurora. We also are backup for Naperville, and Naperville's a backup for us. So that whole telecommunications network is basically providing multiple services to different agencies and also the Park District, right? And there's intergovernmental agreements actually between that. So taking that same approach, what we did was that let's set up this cybersecurity capability and let's focus on a regional SOC, right? Now, the money coming down from the federal government, that's great, the whole Biden administration, and I applaud them for that. But again, that's going to be some years before that happens, right? So we've just decided to, we'll build Rome and they'll come, right? There was ARPA funding, there was some of the COVID relief funding, and we've taken some of that money and allocated it and started to build out this capability. And also not just from the city, because the county is sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars of ARPA funds that they have no idea what they're gonna spend it on, right? I went directly to the Kane County Board Commissioners, to the CIO, and said, we should partner, we can build the business justification, and we can do some of these things. So they're actually open to that. But even so, supporting like City of Aurora, I mean, there's so many different surrounding villages and how do you say, townships and things of that nature. So we're looking at how we can build this regional SOC and support these different municipalities. So we know they don't have the funding. So we said, okay, great, we'll do an IGA. We'll charge back a percentage. Of course, we'll put a percentage uptick on it, right? To basically for transaction fees and things of that nature. But we're not trying to basically make money off of the other municipalities, but we want to make sure that we offset our costs and then have additional funding to modernize and pump money back into, the capability. And there's many of the municipalities that are interested, and not just the municipalities, the counties are looking at, say, hey, we can use this too, just like Aurora, and Kane County is the main one, right, in terms of that cybersecurity capability. So there's partnerships out there, but again, it takes, that say, I'm going to go talk to these people, I'm going to kind of push that envelope, I'm going to do my due diligence, sit down, put a plan together, and look at the economics of it, and also look at the outcome, and then selling that to the commissioners and the city council to say, hey, getting them involved, because you always got to get them involved. You got to give it to them like it's their idea so they can get in front of the news camera, right? and they can kind of get some of the credit, right? But, selling that idea and partnering with, the elected officials to do it, because they're the ones who's actually approving it, right? And I mean, it's worked for us, right? But again, I mean, we are the second largest city in the state. We should have that flexibility. We should be pushing the envelope to support these other smaller municipalities and build out these capabilities. So,
Right. Thank you. And I'm going to, show my deep ignorance on this topic. Does everyone here know what a regional SOC is? What's a SOC?
security operations.
That's good. The D-suite is
Well,
fully
she better
aware
know.
of the
They
SOC.
better know over there.
So really, what is it?
Oh, so it is a security operations center. So basically, they're monitoring the network 24/7. They're doing intrusion detection and prevention, blocking, analyzing, and basically reacting to different type of threats.
Thank you. I mean, I know when we're in the biz, we start just adding
Yeah, I'm
acronyms
sorry.
and building acronyms, and we get like CISO. That's also, I'm going to admit, that's new to me. But I trust everyone here knows what a CISO is because it was mentioned in the keynote, and then prior to that, does everybody know? Is it Chief Information Security Officer? Well, yes. Yes. Okay, that's great. So I would love to open it up to audience questions if folks have anything there. Smoke filling through the brain. Yes, please, Angela.
So, thank you both. This is wonderful. It's really got my brain thinking as how can MXDs be a supporter of municipalities who are facing workforce challenges, resource constraints, which is exciting to know that there's potential there. I'll shift gears in my question, and this, Mike Schrader, this one's for you because you mentioned that you have worked in utility sector widely, including electrical, which is much more heavily regulated than water is. Water is just wholly unregulated, essentially, and they're struggling to be able to implement regulations that are as secure as electrical operations. Can you tell me your thoughts on how to get water up to speed in where other parts of infrastructure are in terms of regulation, and if we think that it will be kind of a driver to get individuals to start jumping onto cybersecurity regulations?
Well, I know that our director, for the water, has recently went with the, AWA, okay, to Washington, and because they were proposing that to do cybersecurity audits, it was, I forget which part of the EPA that really had no experience with cybersecurity. They went up there and said, look at the electric industry, and they put that letter to the Congress to say, or the EPA, to say, look at what they do in the electric side. So there is that already, that push from that association for representing the water industry, to do that. And I think that is the right approach. That's just my opinion, because, it's kind of like what Michael said about, fishing your people and it's a dictatorship. Well, to me, it's like, nobody likes regulation, but in this case, I think it's very important to follow those processes that are already clearly defined, in reporting and, techniques that you have to do. And the water could definitely benefit from being more secure from that, so.
Yeah, why reinvent the wheel? If there are structures and guidance in place for the electric sector, that could translate quite well.
Those SIP standards, what they call them, NERC SIP, if you look it up, then they're clearly defined, like, patching your systems, access control, like new assets, just, how do you bring those on your system in a secure manner? How do you retire old assets? There's, employee training we have to do, the incident response plan every year, we have to exercise it, every 15 months. And then you learn from those experiences of like, okay, we're doing this wrong, or we need to change this, and that's a requirement. So we recently, on the electric side, went through, every 3 years you go through an audit, okay? And basically, they went through and found nothing. They loved our processes, so we had no, because you can be fined, too. So, but we were very fortunate that our processes in place are working, and we have not been hacked. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Thank you. That was a good question. Thanks, Angela.
So my question is more related. Thanks. So my question is more related about funding when it comes to cybersecurity. Being such a rapidly evolving topic and continuously expanding, there's always something out there that we need to protect and defend. So how difficult is it for the cities to obtain funding, especially when it comes to critical infrastructure?
I'll let you approach that one. The grant side is new to this.
And I'm laughing because it's probably one of the biggest challenges, right? But again, it depends on the administration, the leadership, their appetite for risk, right? The money is there, right? The money is definitely there. It's just about having the business case, the tenacity, and pushing the envelope just to go get it, right? The whole value proposition actually around cyber, right? You can look at it from a perspective, if X happens, what's the liability to the city, and if not, where are we at? And again, if you're not doing anything, it's just a matter of time, right? So you take that scenario in terms of what if an impact happened, and that can be calculated. Trust me, we did it with insurance companies, right? Because we do have cyber insurance since how long? 2019, because when I came in, it was not there. They did a calculation for us and, what the impact would be, right? And what we would be paying. So it came out and it quantified actually what that value proposition is. I think when you're dealing with administration and elected officials, you need to be able to quantify and also engage them and speak in a language that they understand. I think the challenges is, as IT professionals, we go in with acronyms and terms and things that they don't understand. They're looking at technology. It's like, I have just right over their head. So they're going to say, okay, move on to the next topic. It's like, what sidewalks do we have to build? What roads do we have to build? But you got to take those justifications back to them in terms that they can understand, right? And I think that's probably the biggest challenge, right? And sometimes, and if you can't as an organization, get a consultant to say the same thing that you're saying in terms that they can understand, right? Talk about risks, right? Talk about continuity of operations. Talk about impact, right? And quantify those things, right? And get those agencies involved that should be involved in those conversations, like your emergency management there within an organization, IEMA, right? Department of Homeland Security, CISA, right? You can even get the FBI. They'll advise, but that's about it. They're not gonna, everything will be kind of off the record with them. But, just getting those agencies to kind of, co-sign and validate what you're saying, it makes a big difference. It makes a huge difference, right? Because if it's just, I didn't go in there with a magic wand and this stuff happened on day one. I've been doing this stuff for the last 5 years, and every day it's something else, right? But it takes building that trust with your leadership, them seeing that, he put that in place, there's an impact, it's tangible, and you're reporting on it. Then the next time you come, they're going to be more open to say, okay, let me hear what you got to say, right? So, it's not a matter of if the funding is there. It's just how you go about procuring the funding, right? Because again, the counties, the money comes from the state. From the state, it goes to the counties. Then it goes to the municipalities. And, a lot of times they say, the person with the loudest voice in the room gets the most money. That's true in government, right? And that is very true. So.
I wonder if some of the translation could be accommodated by using the physical infrastructure language that's used by decision makers these days at least for water and wastewater. I'm not sure about manufacturing, but for asset management. So you're looking at, your electronic asset management, digital asset management. Looking at it from a perspective of likelihood of failure and then the risk of that failure, right? Or the consequence of that failure. So for physical infrastructure and the water side, often decisions and budgets are set when you have maybe a low risk of failure, but a really high consequence if something fails. And then conversely, you may have a very high likelihood that something's going to fail, but it doesn't really mean much. So I'm wondering if those types of language, that kind of terminology might help when you're at the budgeting table with city decision makers.
No, you're absolutely right. When you talk about outcomes, right, and results and impacts, I think that's the language that they understand, right? Because we had one situation where we went in front of city council, and it was just to connect the fiber from Aurora to Naperville, right? It was fairly expensive project. It was like a couple $1 million, and they was like, why do we need to do this? I was like, because if we don't do this, the public safety won't be able to speak to Naperville if they have to switch over the backup system, and then you're going to have a huge impact, negative impact to public safety. And I told one of the council members, I said, you don't want to be responsible for that, and we're on the record, right? And he was like, right? And afterwards, he came back to me, and he basically said, I've never had a city staff put me on the spot, in front of the reporters. But I was like, it was the truth, right? So they were looking at things from a perspective of, the outcomes, right? No one wants to be on the record to say that they're going to vote no against something that impacts public safety, right? You got to take that kind of same perspective. Maybe not put that council member on call. That's not really a good career move, but
Pick your battles. Are there any other? Who was first?
I have an observation, ever so briefly, that I probably don't need to use, but I think it's interesting that when you came on board, Michael, in 2018, and you talked about silos and breaking down silos, and increasingly as we're more interconnected as a society, it requires greater collaboration is what we're arriving at, right? Collaboration with the county levels and the strength that you have with collaboration, and certainly forgetting about the silos that existed in the past, but the need because of the interconnectivity that we require as a society to be more collaborative in order to muster our resources as a community then, And I think it was just an aha as we're just sitting here chatting, that's all.
And the cyber is just one use case. Look at the pandemic, right? When we were trying to, and hopefully nobody's from the state here besides the National Guard, I'm just going to throw this out here. When the COVID thing kicked off and we were looking at the state level to deploy vaccinations, right, at the state level, why couldn't we react faster? Nobody was sharing the data, right? It was the Illinois Department of Health was trying to get the data. They had to get it from the counties, right? Counties didn't want to share the data because they said there's no data sharing agreements. At the city level, we were trying to get data from the counties, and the counties didn't want to give it to us because they said there's no data sharing agreements. What we did, we had one of our guys in our data analytics team, sorry, I'm diverting here, who was 19 years old. He went and scraped all the data from the county websites, took the data. We took that data, we built dashboards, and we were able to pinpoint all the COVID outbreaks throughout the 4 counties in the city of Aurora, and we used that data to report to our citizens. And I'm just going to throw out here, when the COVID happened, Aurora was the first city in the state to deploy mass vaccination facilities in the state. And actually, the state of Illinois used Aurora as a template for their model. So, and I'll give that back to the leadership for the city of Aurora, just looking for creative ways. And it comes back to the point of collaboration, right? That's just with data. Now we're talking about cyber, right?
So your point about leadership sets the tone. I mean, straight up at the top level to be able to create the mindset for the collaboration.
Absolutely.
So to continue that theme of collaboration, so coming from the side of the fence of corporations who provide products and managed services, I work for Siemens. So how can we help, right? Because when it comes to cyber, you're only as good as your weakest link, and we will never be the operators, right? All the password resets and protocols and stuff like that. And we certainly don't want to have that headline, just like you guys don't want to have that headline of a cyber attack and we're the managed service provider, right? So what could we be doing just generically from a managed service provider or a technology provider to be a better resource, better collaborators?
I have an idea. I mean, most of the funding either comes from the government or from the private sector, right? So funding is one, to fund these projects and these research things, being collaborators here within MXD, looking for those use cases within the different municipalities, counties, or whatever, to say, hey, there's a problem, how do we address that? And how do we take those best practices and deploy those across other locations, right? So, I mean, there's multiple ways, and I know Siemens doing a lot of that today. So it was just more of a comment just from my side, but.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just wanted to, I guess, expand upon the collaboration, a topic that we're sharing here. I'm with Cook County, and I worked on our ARPA plan. So we received a lot of money as well. But I think we are, there's a lot of constituents are that's the entity that we end up having to, to report to. We want to service our communities and service our businesses. And we went through a very detailed process to determine which projects would be funded. And cyber is a topic of importance, but we need regional collaboration to really, for all the counties to come together and to talk about that, because it's more than just us. We're not going to just put resources into. We're replacing lead pipes. We're making water more accessible. We're expanding broadband. All those things need to be done. And then we need to have this larger conversation for these protective measures, I believe.
Right. I agree with you, but I would look at it from a different lens. I would say I get it. I mean, we all report to the constituents. I agree that there's a prioritization, but cyber should be fundamental across all of those, because if security hits, it's not going to matter whether it's public works, whether it's community services, whether it's the police, fire. Cyber should be fundamental, and there should be a percentage of that funding or prioritization built into all those different projects where cyber is, because it's not something that you prioritize after something. It should be prioritized with all of those different projects, right? So I think it's a different view in terms of how you prioritize cyber. It should be baked in, right? It shouldn't come second or third. It should be part of every one of those particular projects.
Yeah, I think to expand on it a little, like, to me, you can't retrofit like cybersecurity after the fact. It's got to be planned and built in properly. And that's what I see, like, an example, like our ERP system's going up for RFP, and we talked to CISA yesterday, representative, and he said, do you have language in there about if you're going to the cloud, who's responsible? Where's like I was talking earlier about the DMARC, who's responsible for the cybersecurity? Is it even thought of in that contract? So when you're doing contracts and stuff, you have to think about that too right from the get-go. You can't, bring it in afterwards. Because a lot of times if you want to have, like reporting, like SOC type reporting from that vendor, they may not want to share that because they're not doing it very well. Back to the, providers, managed services and stuff. So if they're doing it well, then they wouldn't have a problem putting that in the contract and sharing that information. So just throwing that out.
And actually, that's part of a policy that we have in place. It's the vendor risk assessment. You do that before you actually award them the contract, and you make it a requirement, right? And if they don't, if they're not in accordance, they don't get the contract, right? So.
Thank you both so much. This has been a really informative session. We have just about a minute or so left, and I'd like to end this conversation with a lightning round of sorts and ask you to each give maybe 30 seconds on MXD's approach here. They're just completed with phase 1 of a pretty large effort related to this topic for water and manufacturing. If MXD were to repeat this workshop 1 year from today, where would you like to see your agency or the sector in general be?
I guess really that continued like collaboration, and information sharing. Like I said, it's very important for that situational awareness of what risks are out there, evolving risks. We got, in the hyper-connected world that we have here, there's, you you're not aware of, you know, if you're not keeping up with information sharing across the whole, you know, water, electric, all the critical infrastructure. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I actually agree. I think the continued or heightened level of collaboration between the private sector and the public sector, I'm a big advocate of public-private partnerships, especially in the municipalities where we can't do it by ourselves. We have to depend on the MXDs, we have to depend on the private sector, we have to depend on our defense agencies. I think, and all that leads to a increased level of maturity, right? And again, it's incremental. It's not going to happen in a big bang effect. It's going to be small incremental chunks, but it has to be consistent and it has to be repetitive, right? And you got to be tenacious with it. So,
Thank you. Well, you know, it scares me, I'll admit. I'm team analog. I am team Battlestar Galactica here, just for the record. Before we wrap here, quick quiz, what's a sock? Not you. I know you know what it is. I know you know what it is. Come on. Thank you. Security Operations Center. That's your word of the day, your acronym of the day. Thank you.
thank you.